Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a VR to Amidst the Gray with Coffeehouse Decks. This is such a fun tarot tag. I don't know how I missed it when it came out and when it went around the tarot tube sphere, I think around about a month ago. I'm a little behind, but I've really been enjoying catching up with all the VRs and watching the original video, which I'll leave link for you in the description box below. And I went ahead and selected all of my decks for these 13 coffeehouse inspired prompts. I really had to rein myself in because I got so excited by all the prompts and all of the deck possibilities that I had this massive list for each of the prompts, and I did eventually kind of wear them down to just one per prompt. So we're gonna go ahead and jump in. I also did a super nerdy thing and I went and looked up what each of these coffee drinks actually are and how they're made. And that is the criteria through which I kind of selected my decks. So I have my obligatory cup of coffee here. So having taken a little sip, I'm gonna set my coffee to the side so it doesn't get in the way of the decks. And we're gonna go ahead and jump on in. So the first category in this tag is the Espresso shot. And it's a deck that's strong, punchy, and gets straight to the point. So of course, as most of us know, Espresso is a small concentrated shot of coffee. It's usually the base for a lot of the more elaborate drinks that we see coming out of coffee houses. And I really love this idea of kind of that small, concentrated message. And so I chose the Barbara Walker Tarot. Now, a lot of these decks that I have chosen here today could actually fall into several of these different categories. So I kind of had to go back and forth and determine which one I wanted to have where. But when it came to small, concentrated, gets straight to the point and is a strong reader, for me, that is definitely the Barbara Walker. This imagery is a little bit in your face, but it also gets right to the heart of what's going on. It's not always delivered in the nicest, coziest, sort of curl up with a cup of coffee kind of an energy. It's more like a espresso shot in the morning to kick your butt into gear. And I thought that this one just worked really great for this prompt. I love this deck. It shows up in a lot of favorites and tags and categories of decks for me. It sits in my favorite basket. I call it my salty grandma deck because it's the deck that I really turn to when I just want that really no nonsense advice, because I feel this deck a little bit, and I've mentioned it before, it kind of has a little bit of the energy like, really, I'm sick of your crap, just do the work already, right? Like it kind of gets a little fed up with me from time to time because it's like, just do the work. So I feel like this is a great deck to kind of embody that idea of the espresso shot, that small concentrated shot that really kicks you in the butt, gets you going, gets you moving in the right direction. And I think this is a fantastic little deck for that. So the next prompt is the drip, and that's a deck that's simple, accessible, and gets the job done. So a drip is basically coffee that's been made in a machine. And I went back and forth about what deck to choose for this because I was thinking, you know, it's an automatic coffee maker that makes a drip coffee. And so maybe I should pick something that's really in that Rider-Waite-Smith, very traditional kind of an energy because it's like automatic, it gets the job done. You don't really hesitate with the messages. But really, when I looked back at the whole idea of it's simple and accessible, for me, that's the Spacious Tarot. Now, this is more of a pip style deck, and that for me really does lean more into the simple. It's a little bit more minimalistic. I get to read this deck a little bit more in alignment with my own personal practice, which is a little bit more numerologically and elementally. So while this may not quite make sense for other people in terms of a simple, accessible, and gets the job done, it definitely fits that category for me because I can read it in my own way. I can read it in the way that I was taught to read tarot, the way that I have developed my own language with tarot. And I don't have to worry about adding in additional layers or symbolism or anything like that. It's a very clear, straightforward, to the point reader for me, but it also just always gets the job done. Like right from the get-go, I don't really struggle with the messages, again, because I am using my own interpretations. However, the little guidebook is really fantastic. But I just find this imagery to be really simple, very charming, but also very clear and to the point. I really enjoy working with this deck. It's one that I probably don't talk about as much, but that's mostly because it is actually more of a summer deck for me, so it's not one that I'm currently working with. But when it comes to simple, really to the point, really accessible, I feel like this for me personally is really accessible because it doesn't bring a whole lot of esoteric layering into it. And I think that if you are starting out with tarot, like everybody recommends the Rider-Waite-Smith, and that's great because a lot of our materials are based on that. However, if you kind of learn the base underneath that, these sort of elemental numerological associations, then it kind of allows you to just pick up and read with any deck, which is really cool. That's how I was taught. And so this deck for me becomes really accessible in that way because I'm able to just pick it up and read with it in the way that I was taught. So the next prompt is the Pourover, and this is a deck that you need to take your time with, but it's totally worth the effort. So a Pourover is pouring hot water over coffee grounds in a filter. It's also referred to as hand brewed coffee. So the deck I chose for this is the Haindl or Haindl, however it is you pronounce that, tarot. This deck is fairly new in my collection. I just started working with it in 2022, and it is a deck that has definitely required me to spend some time with it, to go slow, to work my way through. It is very thought-based. There's also I Ching associations, which is something I'm currently learning, so that just adds a whole nother layer. Unlike the Spacious tarot, there is layer upon layer upon layer of symbolism in this deck. And so I think it really is a benefit to take your time with it, but it is also really, really worth the effort. I also love this idea of like hand brewed coffee in the Pourover because I do feel like this deck was created, by hand, right? I do believe these are paintings. Please don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. It's gorgeous, gorgeous artwork. I really, really enjoy working with it. It's definitely not a hug deck for me, but I do believe that like all of these associations here in working with this deck really do just add to the depth and the richness. It's like that Pourover, right? I think the longer you let it set, the better, stronger it becomes. And I feel like this deck is definitely in that category for me. So the next deck is the Cafe Latte, and this is a deck that's well received and highly palatable. So I had to do a little bit of research on the difference between some of these coffee beverages because like they're very, very similar. A cafe latte is espresso and steamed milk that's mixed, and it has a frothy top on top, a frothed milk top. But the proportions aren't equal. It's more milk than espresso, and we'll get into the difference here in the next prompt. So the deck I picked for this is the Victorian Romantic. Now I feel like this deck is a very well-received, very highly palatable deck. It's on that coveted Bauer Studios cardstock, which is just absolutely lovely. And it's a beautiful deck, but I love that it has this deepness and this richness like an espresso shot, but it's got this overlay of like this milky, creamy, a little bit sweet energy to it. I always shuffle that title card in there. And when you look at it from that respect, like I think the cafe latte isn't necessarily sweetened, but the milk and the frothy foam adds a sweetness to it. And I feel like that's what this deck offers. It is very rich and earthy underneath that sort of frothy, milky layer. And I just think it's beautiful. It's also very palatable, I think. It reads really, really well. It's very well received in the community overall. It could have also fit in another category here, which I'll mention when we get to it because it is the cold foil stamped edition. I do believe this one is the 3rd edition, and it is a beautiful deck in general. It's kind of a little bit extra in that sense, and that's another prompt, but I've got another deck selection for that. So this one is just, yeah, it's a favorite reader in my collection. It's one that I tend to use for very heart-centered readings. It's also one that I tend to work with a lot in the spring. So the next prompt is the Cappuccino, a deck that's classic, sophisticated, and maybe a little bit fussy. So I looked up what exactly a cappuccino is and what the difference is between a cappuccino and a cafe latte because I am a nerd. And it is equal parts espresso, steamed milk, and froth foam. So same ingredients as the cafe latte, it seems. I should have asked my youngest, who is actually a barista. And the difference between the cappuccino and the cafe latte is that the cappuccino has those things in equal amounts. Now, I saw a lot of people chose the Pagan Otherworlds for this because of that fussy cardstock, and I definitely considered that, but I actually decided to choose the Tarot Mucha. Now, this is a deck that I had in my collection, rehomed, and then repurchased. So it's one that's kind of boomeranged back to me. This deck for me feels like it fits that classic because it is very Rider-Waite-Smith. I feel like it fits sophisticated because the artwork feels very beautiful, very grown up. It feels very different than the artwork and art style we see in Pixie's original art. However, it is very much based on that in a lot of ways. It definitely follows that traditional RWS system, but this feels like a very sophisticated, grown-up version of it. And it is a bit fussy because it is really highly detailed. I feel like the artwork itself, the borders are fussy. They're really detailed. They're kind of, in some places, almost a little bit intrusive. And the cardstock is also a little bit fussy. It is shiny, glossy cardstock, and it's quite thick. So this deck is quite the chunky monkey. I don't even have the whole deck here, and you can see how thick it actually is. And it's not the easiest thing in the world for me to riffle shuffle. I can, but it's a stiff shuffle. It's also not the easiest thing in the world to overhand because it is so thick. And so this deck gets that fussy label because of the cardstock and the way it shuffles, which I think is a thing that a lot of people mentioned with their Pagan Otherworlds. I did not put the Pagan Otherworlds in here because I have trimmed mine and it's way less fussy now. But I feel like this is a good fit for that category because of the cardstock, the way it shuffles, the way it works, and these just really fussy, sort of overly ornate borders just feel like they kind of fit in that space for me. So the next category is the Mocha, and that's a deck that's rich, indulgent, and a bit extra. So I actually looked this up. Mocha means a type of good quality coffee that's made from a specific coffee bean, which I did not know. I always just assumed that mocha meant it had chocolate in it. It often has chocolate in it, but it's actually coffee made from a specific coffee bean. So for that rich, indulgent, and just a bit extra, I chose the Tyldwick Tarot. And I do apologize, this one is out of print, but like it has this beautiful, it is shiny, but it is really, really high quality gilding. It's one of the few gilded decks that I've actually left the way it is. This deck to me feels like a mocha. It is deep, it is rich, it is indulgent, it is such a beautiful reader. It feels like stepping into this gorgeous, ornate world. It could be maybe considered a little bit sophisticated and fussy, but while it may be a classic in the tarot sense, it's really not, in my opinion, a super classic, as in very traditional deck, because it does have a very different perspective on the tarot, which I really appreciate. We are like in the tarot of place with this deck. We're stepping into these rooms, these areas that relate to the energy of the card that it's depicting, which I think is just absolutely beautiful. But for rich and deep and indulgent, yeah, the Tyldwick Tarot was just like the main deck that came to mind for me for this particular prompt. It does feel like a gorgeous, hot, rich, deep cup of mocha, which is just like beautiful and a wonderful treat, particularly in those gloomy winter days, which we are currently experiencing here in the Pacific Northwest. So the next deck is the Cartado, which is a deck that's balanced and objective. Now, I definitely had to look this one up because I've never heard that before. The name actually means cut in Spanish, or so the internet says. It's an espresso, typically cut with steamed, unsweetened milk. And so that was kind of the key thing that I picked up on with this particular prompt, that is similar to that cappuccino, that cafe latte, as in it's espresso and milk, but this seems to be more of an unsweetened, and the ingredients are very much imbalanced. And so for that, I chose the Anna.K. This is the mass market edition, and I have edged mine in black. This deck to me is very balanced and objective. One of the things that I really appreciate about this deck is that it embodies the energy, the archetypes, and the inherent symbolism of the tarot without adding a whole lot of layering in terms of additional correspondences. And so it's very straightforward and to the point. I think it creates a beautiful blend, that really balanced blend between giving you the message that you need and delivering it in a way that is pretty objective most of the time. I actually use this deck as my family counselor a lot of the time because of that, because it is very relatable, but also very balanced, very objective, unintrusive, and these characters, I've mentioned the faces, like it's either a you love it or hate it type of thing. I think with these faces, I was a little put off by them at first, and over the years I have grown to absolutely love them. They are so expressive and they've become like friends, but these are friends that really do kind of keep their distance from me a little bit, right? We're bonded, we're connected, but they remain objective. They make sure that they maintain the balance in the situation when I'm coming to this deck. And I do personify my decks. That is just how I relate to them. So it's always a they or a he or a she, depending on the deck I'm talking about. So this is this whole idea of like it being kind of that espresso, that concentrated, strong shot of coffee that we get through these messages, but it's cut. So it's cut to take down, I think, the bitterness a little bit. It adds a little bit of sweetness through the milk. I am such a nerd. I'm sorry. I totally went into the whole coffee thing. I do absolutely love coffee. So this was a great excuse for me to study a little bit more about coffee. So this deck, I think, just represents that beautifully. It's always a deck I recommend to people who are new to tarot. The guidebook is really great, and it's just a great way to learn the tarot without adding in just tons and tons and tons of additional correspondences or symbolic layering. It just kind of gets to the point of things. So the next prompt is another one that I had to look up. It's the Con Panna, a deck that puts you in your place with a hint of sweetness. The Con Panna apparently means espresso with cream in Italian, and is a single or double shot of espresso topped with whipped cream. So it's like it's that espresso again, but it's got like that dollop of sweetness on the top. So the deck I chose for this is the Outgrow Yourself Tarot and Oracle. The reason I chose this particular deck is because it is very direct and to the point. It is pulling back in that espresso energy. It's super strong, punchy, and gets straight to the point. But sometimes the messages add just that little bit of sweetness to it that kind of takes a little bit of the edge off. It is also a thought-based deck that can be used as an oracle because it has the oracle messages. So depending on if you want that super strong espresso energy, you can just look to the tarot associations on the bottom, or if you want something a little bit sweet to just kind of take the edge off of that, you can look to the oracle message up top. So here we have death, but it says blossom. We have swiftness, power is present. Science, what is limiting your growth? So I love this deck because it has such a great versatile energy. I can use it as a tarot, I can use it as an oracle, I can use it as both at the same time, which is fantastic. I do really like the artwork. Again, I think this is another type of artwork. It's kind of either you dig it or you don't, which is totally cool. I do find this artwork that in some ways to be a bit kind of challenging in that strong, get straight to the point. Here we have like the knives in the back, you know, that are bloodied, but then we also have like the flowers and all this beautiful blooming energy that comes through each of these cards. So like it is very espresso, but with a dollop of cream on top. It just depends on how you're working with it, how you're interacting with it. You can really step into focusing on those strong, punchy, straight to the point messages, or you can look more to the oracle message and maybe look to the flowers to see like, where are you reaching your full potential, right? It pairs beautifully with some of my other sort of butt kicker kind of decks, and I really love that for it. But it does have a little bit of a sweetness. There's a little bit of that cream there to kind of cut cut the edge of it down a little bit. So the next prompt is the Chai Latte, and that's a deck that's warm, cozy, and nurturing. So a Chai Latte is made by mixing steamed milk with black tea that has been infused with spices, and for this I chose the Northern Animal Tarot. This is one of my absolute favorite comfort decks. I did re-round the corners of mine with a larger corner rounder because I felt like it just softened the energy up, and I did edge mine in yellow. I don't know if I've always pointed out when I've done mod on a deck, but I try to. This deck is warm, cozy, nurturing. It is like a beautiful, warm, aromatic cup of chai latte in your hand. I find it to be really, really soft, sweet, nurturing. These characters feel like this beautiful little community that I can tap into, that I can come to, that I can be a part of. And they're always there to support me and to point me in the right direction. It's also very much a good mood deck for me. Just immersing myself in this little animal world just makes me happy. I love the illustrations. I love the anthropomorphized animals. I think they are just so sweet and charming. They feel like old friends, which is so fantastic. And again, it's just a sweet deck. I do think that this deck came back into print, went back out. I did hear from some people that there was going to be another pre-order again, hopefully maybe in the coming months, because the first pre-order that just went out at the beginning of the year sold out in like a day or two, or perhaps even less than a day. It was really, really quick, and I can totally see why, because I will sing the praises of this deck all day long. I think it's fantastic, and everybody should have it. Especially if you like this sort of anthropomorphized animal energy like we see here. It's just beautiful, so comforting, nurturing, and supportive. So the next prompt is the Matcha Latte, and that's a deck that's an acquired taste or a bit unconventional. So Matcha Latte is green tea powdered and steamed milk. It's generally bright green and slightly bitter, and for this I chose the only oracle that I have in this tag, the Brian Froud's Faeries Oracle. This one I have edged. Try to point that out. This deck, I think, is both an acquired taste and completely unconventional, even for an oracle deck. This deck is like stepping into the Fae world. It doesn't so much have oracle messages that we tend to see, where it's like, you know, abundance or joy or step out of your shadow or whatever it is that we tend to see on traditional oracle decks. This one has really interesting key phrases on it, I guess. It also has an energy that does feel not so much bright as in like vibrant green type of a color thing. The color palette is actually quite dark and earthy, but it feels very energetic. So it's very energetically bright, but it is slightly bitter because this deck does come with a little bit of an edge to it. These Fae, if they mess around, it's usually in a little bit of a chaotic sort of a way. At least that's been my experience with it. But for the most part, it's a little bit, has a little bit of a bitter edge to it, as in sometimes it delivers the message in a way that is a little bit hard to swallow. It really doesn't mess around. It doesn't pull any punches. And like I said, if it is messing around, it's usually in a kind of chaotic sort of way. And it's just such an interesting deck. I do also have the other Oracle deck, which is the Heart of Faeries Oracle by Brian Froud. That deck has a completely different energy. This one felt like the better fit between the two because this one doesn't always deliver the messages in the easiest to swallow format. It could have also been in the category of a deck that you need to take your time with, but it's worth the effort because although I have connected more closely with the Heart of Faeries, I do feel like this deck, if you put the time and effort into it, like there's a lot to be gained from working with it. But it is really an acquired taste in my opinion. Working with Fae is an acquired taste in my opinion. It doesn't always resonate for everybody. I'm still finding my footing with it. And this deck is definitely unconventional and slightly bitter. So the next prompt is the hot chocolate deck, a deck that speaks to the younger version of yourself. So obviously a hot chocolate is some type of chocolate or cocoa heated in water or milk. And this one was a no-brainer for me. This is the Bauer Tarot. I have edged my copy. This deck is a cup of hot chocolate. Not only does it speak to my younger self, like my child self, right? Not teenager, but much, much younger than that, because I grew up reading fairy tales and immersing myself in these beautiful other worlds, these kind of almost fae-like worlds with trolls and faes and fairies and all kinds of wonderful creatures and magic and mystery. Also a little bit of shadow, a little bit of darkness in there. It speaks to that version of myself for sure, but it also has this really warm kind of chocolatey, slightly sweet, delicious artwork. And that also feels very much like a hot cocoa deck. It just like the artwork, like the color palette, like feels warm and delicious and dark and chocolatey and so good. And I feel like there's that little bit of sweetness from the milk too. So you get that sort of light and shadow energy coming through with this deck, which I think is super cool. And it was like the deck that jumped to mind for the hot chocolate prompt because it does speak to the younger version of myself. It speaks to, little grade school me who wanted to do nothing but sit in the library and read. And please could I skip recess and PE and just disappear into my books. That was my world, my life. I was always lost in a book. And this deck just really embodies that beautifully. But again, it also feels like a cup of hot chocolate in the hand. It's warm and chocolatey and so good, and it's just beautiful. So the next prompt is the Italian Soda, a deck that's fun, low-key, and not overly serious. So an Italian Soda is actually a soft drink made from carbonated water and flavored syrup. Now, I saw a lot of people choose the Tarot of Curious Creatures for this, which is a fantastic match. However, I had to pick the Desert Illuminations for my Italian Soda. This is a brand new deck in my collection. I just received it and I have been having a ball getting to know it. It is bright and colorful. It feels like it has that carbonated sort of energy to it. It feels very effervescent, and it has all the beautiful bright colors that we tend to see in Italian sodas. It also totally has alien, so I'm on board for that. It's definitely fun, it's definitely low-key, and it does not take itself too seriously. It is brand new to my collection, so a lot of this is completely based off the artwork because I haven't done much in the way of reading with it. It does feel more like a summer deck for me, so unless I'm really looking to bring this pop of vibrant energy, it's not one I would normally go to in the darker winter months where we are currently at in the Pacific Northwest. But I do really love the energy of this, so it might be one that I do pull in when it just gets to be a little too gray for too long around here, which is definitely something that happens. I love this Queen of Cactus with the alien. It's so fantastic. It's just, yeah, such a fun, playful deck. We're gonna stop in the Judgment card because it is my favorite card in this deck. It is so amazing. And finally, we have the last prompt, which is the Herbal Tea, a deck that takes things down a notch or helps you unwind. So Herbal Tea is an infusion of herbs, spices, and other plant materials in hot water. And the deck I chose for this is the White Sage Tarot. This is the little tarot in a tin. And this is most often my deck I use for unwinding, for slowing down, for taking a moment. I just love this little deck. It has such a great comforting energy. It's so soothing. I use this one a lot at bedtime. I recently showed how I use this one a lot for palette cleansing as well. I love the pip style nature of this deck. I find, again, it's kind of similar to the Spacious Tarot. It lets me just kind of step away from everything else and just read the deck the way that I want to read it and work with it in a way that actually aligns with my practice. So for me, it's also very simple, a really easy reader, and it just has a wonderful, nurturing, supportive, kind of really mindful and quiet sort of an energy that I just think works really beautifully for taking things down a notch, for winding down. There are also a lot of chakra correspondences in this deck. That is the main correspondence that you'll find in this deck, and the ribbons relate to the chakras, which is really wonderful if you want to kind of work on slowing down like through your body, one chakra at a time. That's also a beautiful practice that I've done on occasion with this deck. I absolutely love that the quartz and the pentacles are elephants as well. That's just so fun, so beautiful. We'll leave on this little Knight of Cups because he looks super cute and winding down with his little cup of coffee or maybe his little herbal tea. So there we go. That is my 13, I think, Coffeehouse decks of VR to Amidst the Gray. I will definitely leave a link to the original video along with links for everything I've shown here in the description box below. Definitely go check that video out. It was a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed seeing all of the VRs to it. I do want to mention I saw it originally on Lucy's channel, Seaside Tarot, which if you haven't seen Lucy, definitely go check her out as well. I absolutely adore Lucy. So that is it for me today. I really enjoyed sharing all of my Coffeehouse decks with you. I would love to know what yours would be. So if you have done a VR or you just want to drop them in the comments below, that would be fantastic. I'd love to know what decks you would have in your Coffeehouse deck collection. In the meantime, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.